All right, and welcome to part two of the lecture, Development Changes Across Our Lifetime. All right, so again, not reading the learning objectives, just go ahead and read those for yourself. And let's get started. All right, start off with an explanation of adolescence and what is it. And we're going to focus on developing how adolescents develop independence, their identity, and puberty. So adolescence, what we see in the slide, developing independence and identity. We define adolescence, it refers to the period between the onset of puberty and the transition to adulthood. And that typically spans from around age 10 to 19, and the exact ages can vary on an individual. Key features of this period is there are some obvious physical changes. Adolescence happens to be marked by a rapid physical change known as puberty, and that leads to eventually leads to sexual maturity. The changes can include things like growth spurts, development of secondary sexual characteristics like breasts in girls, facial hair in boys, and maturation of reproductive organs for sexual reproduction. There's also a psychosocial development. So within adolescence, it's also the time of a significant psychological and social development. This is the time where they're forming their identity, exploring personal values, beliefs. They're establishing the autonomy from their parents, right? So they're navigating peer relationships and societal expectations and trying to balance these two out, balancing these two out. Now on puberty, a little more into puberty, that it's that process of physical maturation. It leads to sexual maturity, and the goal is to lead to the ability to reproduce. This is all brought on by hormonal triggers. So puberty is actually triggered by hormonal changes, primarily initiated by the pituitary gland in the brain. So for example, in boys, the pituitary gland will stimulate the production of testosterone, while in girls, it stimulates the production of estrogen and progesterone. So the timing is very critical for this. So puberty typically begins between ages of 7 to 13 for girls and 9 to 14 for boys. And there's some variation to that. So these are not exact, time frames. It tends to start earlier in girls on average. And this is the way it's been throughout history. So let's talk about developmental tasks in developing independence and identity. So identity formation for adolescents, this is where they explore different roles, values, aspirations to develop a sense of who they are as individuals. They look at achieving some type of independence, so they can strive for autonomy from parents and caregivers, while learning to make decisions and take responsibility for their actions. They'll also start developing their network or their social structure, establishing those peer relationships, building and weeding out their peer relationships that meets their identity. So adolescents tend to form closer relationships, romantic relationships during the stage, and all of this plays a crucial role in their social development, and it helps them form their identity. This is a time when they're able to start planning for the future. They begin to think about their future education, their career, and life goals. And it's just adolescence is just a dynamic period, right? For both growth, for change, for encompassing both that physical, cognitive, emotional, and social transitions. It's a time where they prepare for adulthood. And so it's a time for exploration, self-discovery, and laying out that groundwork for developing that personal social identity that that's going to evolve into that identity that they have throughout their entire life. So I'll leave it there. I'll give one PSA, one public service announcement, trying to um, establish an identity for an individual when they're pre-pubescent or pre-adolescent, um, or both, I think is harmful to a child, right? If you are trying to establish that for them before they get to the point where they can establish it for themselves. So trying to get kids, I understand trying to get kids into STEM, trying to get kids into thinking about careers early on, but again, it can't be too early. We always say like the earlier the better. Well, in this case, there's a particular time when they're able to appreciate that type of information. And I'm seeing it move earlier and earlier to where kids, I won't say in kindergarten and first grade, but it seems like we're pushing it further and further down uh, before their development where they can actually grasp the information and do something with it. And, all right, let's talk about emerging adulthood. And what is emerging adulthood? It refers to the period of life that typically begins in the late teens, and this extends into the 20s. Around 25 is what we think now. Exact ages can vary. So we characterize this time period as a time of exploration. There's definitely instability. There's definitely more self-focus, and during this time, an individual will have a sense of possibility as they transition from adolescence to full adulthood. Right? They can still dream until life hits them. Some key features. Um, so emerging adults, they explore. I'm doing my hand. They explore different roles. Right? They'll explore different relationships. They'll explore different career paths. They want to get a sense of their self and their personal identity. They're trying to commit or solidify this. It is a period of instability because there's lots of frequent changes that are happening in living arrangements, educational pursuits, jobs, relationships, right? So all this becomes difficult for an individual in this period to transition through or to navigate. So, but it makes a foundation for important life decisions that they'll make later on. There's a self-focus during emergent adulthood where they prioritize personal growth. They'll prioritize autonomy. Um, they start making more independent decisions that's going to actually affect their future. So um, there's a feeling of being like in between two zones or two areas where they feel like they're caught between adolescence and full adulthood. So that transition is pretty important. They can experience some freedom and some responsibility without full commitments to be an adult at this time. A lot of cultures recognize this maybe at different ages for children, and there's some kind of ritual that they use to actually mark the transition from emerging adulthood to adulthood. We can talk about those in class. And even though the ritual itself may not have a lot to do with becoming an adult, it just symbolizes a point where they can grasp onto a time that from here on out, I need to start really focusing on moving into an adulthood, moving into adulthood. And so emerging adulthood is critical for what they're going to be in the future. There's some socioeconomic considerations for this, for emerging adulthood. So it's important to note that the experience of emerging adulthood varies significantly, and this is based on socioeconomic factors like wealth and privilege, cultural as well. So people who are from wealthier backgrounds, they just tend to have more opportunities for education. They have more opportunities to travel, career exploration. They tend to have a lot more support, financial support, and all of this can facilitate a smoother transition into adulthood. As where someone who uh, doesn't have all of those um, resources, that's a good way of saying it. They're gonna start off facing greater challenges at the beginning. Uh, just having the opportunity to access education, trying to develop some kind of secure, stable employment, Achieving financial independence will take longer for these individuals. And so you can understand that the transition that they experience moving from emerging adulthood to adulthood will be set with a lot of instability, and that will definitely affect how they respond and react to problems in adulthood. It'll affect their ethical decision making. So it's important to recognize these socioeconomic disparities within emerging adulthood. There's a greater importance put on social policies, support systems that addresses the needs of all young adults, regardless of whatever background they're from. And these differences, they can help inform, promote equal opportunities in education. They can help provide um, better career development for those who wouldn't necessarily have it. This also provides for better social mobility, and it just ensures that all individuals have the chance to navigate um, this uh, challenging time in their life. All right, we public service announcement that slide. Very, very well. Let's talk about physical development in adolescence. And we're going to include primary, secondary sex characteristics in here as well. So during adolescence, individuals will undergo significant physical changes. And this marks the transition from childhood to adulthood. And these changes are driven by hormonal shifts, and they typically occur over several years. So it's not rapid onset. Um, One of the characteristics is primary sex characteristics, and we define this as sex characteristics that show up in physical features that are directly related to reproduction. So in boys, it's going to bring about the enlargement of the penis and the testicles. And again, these are the organs that mature, that enable sperm production, and the ability to fertilize eggs during sexual intercourse. So within girls, they experience this further development of the ovaries, the uterus, and the vagina, and this will include maturation of these organs to support menstruation and the potential pregnancy that can be experienced in the future. It also helps with secondary sex characteristics, and we define these as characteristics that that present themselves in physical traits that distinguish males from females, but are not directly involved in reproduction. So, for example, secondary sex characteristics include a deeper voice due to the growth of the larynx or the Adam's apple. Uh, Facial and body hair growth is for boys, and growth of a beard, chest hair, increased muscle mass, broadening of the shoulders. In girls, secondary sex characteristics would include things like enlargement of the hips, the breasts, development of body hair as well, such as in the underarms and pubic hair, uh, changes in body shape to a more curvaceous form. Um, and these secondary characteristics are not directly related to reproduction itself, but they are related to reproduction. So hormones have a lot of influence on this stage. The onset of puberty is triggered by hormonal changes, primarily involving testosterone in boys, estrogen in girls, and progesterone as well. The hormones will stimulate development of both the primary and secondary sex characteristics for both genders. And there is some variability, which we'll talk about more in other chapters. So, for example, the timing and the pace of physical development can vary widely among adolescents. So, it could be related to genetic factors, nutrition, overall health, or something in the environment that will play a role in determining the onset and the progression of the changes. And this is a psychology course, so we want to relate this to psychology and its impact. The physical changes during adolescence, they can have a significant psychological effect, influencing self-image, social interactions, and identity formation for adolescents. So they'll experience a range of emotions, and they'll have to adjust and adapt to their changing body. So it's a turbulent time. So we have to understand these physical changes and understand that they're essential for adolescents as they navigate, as they transform and develop into adults, um, and help them build self-awareness, confidence in their changing bodies. Right? Okay. Yeah, we PSA'd that one enough. Physical changes in adolescence. So this one, uh, the men arch, you can look this up in medical terminology. This is the beginning or the onset of menstruation for young women, and they normally will experience this around 10 to 15. Um, and again, timing reflects nature and nurture. There there is research that points to um, I don't know why this is happening. I just know that the evidence is showing that um, menstruation is actually happening on average younger in girls, and within certain ethnicities, it actually happens even earlier for them. And they believe it has something to do with survival. All right, but let's talk about what happens as far as cognitive development. Right? Remember, I'm always going to stress cognitive, affective, and behavioral. So let's talk about cognitive development in adolescence, the brain development. Um, so during this time, right, the brain's continually growing and forming new synapses. It keeps developing well into your 20s. Not only is it just growing physically, but the neural changes that are happening in the synapses, the new connections, um, are creating um, different behaviors, right? Or they're supporting different behaviors. So you're going to form new connections, and you're also going to eliminate some connections. Within the prefrontal cortex, you do have slow maturation. Remember that this is the area of the brain that's responsible for decision making, self control, and it matures very slowly. Um, the impact of behavior when we talk about cognitive development uh, is a slow development, and this can explain why adolescents can sometimes um, act impulsively. Not just adolescents, some adult people too. They didn't develop well. No, forget it. Let's talk about the limbic system, right? So the limbic system has a quicker development, right? So the emotional center of the brain, and it develops more rapidly. So within adolescence, they experience something called adolescent egocentrism, and they believe in um, there's a belief in omniscience and omnipotence, meaning they think they know everything and they're capable of anything, right? Um, I won't say not that this is a replacement for, or this is analogous to confidence. This is like an over abundance of confidence. But with this confidence, there also comes self-consciousness, and so they tend to feel like they're constantly being watched. And um, we walk around like if we have this, not we, but as we all have grown up through this period, we walk around as if we're having this imaginary audience. Right? That's how probably because of watching TV, but we feel like we're always being watched and judged by an imaginary audience, and that's normal. That's actually normal for people. Um, so it's important to understand these changes because it explains why you might feel and act a certain way during adolescence. It's just part of the natural process of growing up, and it's a natural process of your brain development. Well, I'm going slow. Let's talk about social development in adolescence. So, self-concept. So a definition would be so like during adolescence, we further develop our self-concept, and this is a schema, and it contains knowledge about ourselves. There are there are stages of identity development. And uh, stage number one would be identity distinctiveness, and this is understanding what makes you unique compared to others. The second stage is identity coherence, and that's where you integrate different aspects of yourself into like a consistent whole. The third is identity continuity, and that's recognizing that you remain the same person over time despite changes. Um, you can also look at the social identities being developed this time. And so for adolescents, this is when you're learning about your social identity and the part of the self concept that's derived from one's group memberships, like your friends, your family, your social groups. So this period is crucial for figuring out who you are, how you fit into the larger picture of the social world. Social media, which is a whole different topic, is interesting to dive into from this slide. I would like to talk about this during class. All right. Let's talk about what's called the gender unicorn. So this is something what is this? This is appropriate to talk about this for the time that we're in now, and looking at this strictly from a psychological perspective, right? And again, psychological can include feelings, right? So it's cognitive, affective, which tends to deal with the human aspect or the feeling part of things, and behavioral. So when we're trying to understand uh, consciousness, so you can't negate feelings from the entire picture for psychological well-being. Is what I want to say. And this is a hot issue, but it's also something probably important that we should cover in class. And this, what we call the gender unicorn, this is not my term. This is not a term um, of a particular group. This is a term that was created by the TSER, if you see right there, which stands for the Trans Student Educational Resource, to give people better understanding of where they're coming from. So it's a visual tool for educational reasons, for educational purposes. There you go. That's designed to help people understand um, the complexity of gender identity, gender expression, and attraction, how they see it. So it gives us a good groundwork so we can understand where one person's coming from and the other. So it's been long overdue. Um, what it does, it helps facilitate discussions. If you have like a framework to work with and to talk about, um, to I'm losing my words here, to civilly discuss what we term today as gender diversity. Right? And so there's some key components that it addresses. For example, gender identity, gender expression, uh, sex assigned at birth, and then who you're physically attracted to and who you're emotionally attracted to. Um, so let's talk about this so you can get a better understanding, if you don't have one already, on what we look at to categorize each one of these areas. And again, this is a consensus of how to break these down. So gender identity, this is how one person thinks of themselves, right? So the categories would normally be like if you're a female, you're a woman or a girl. If you're a male, you're a man or a boy. And then there's other, right? So female, male, other. Trying to simplify this so it's a little bit easier to facilitate discussion. Right, so that's gender identity, and you might have already seen this in applications um, where other, it might not say other, it might say non-binary. Um, so uh, this is not an ethics class. We're just talking about this from a psychological point of view, a psychology categorization point of view. So just go with me. Um, Gender expression is the next one, and this is how somebody presents themselves. So a little different from gender identity with how you think of yourself. Gender expression is how someone presents themselves. So you can think of what might be more, I don't know, not common, but um, People who cross-dress. What do you call the? I should have been ready for this one. Um, People who do drag shows. Right? They they still identify, or they still think of themselves as male, but they express themselves. Um, um, I'll say feminine. Some women might not like the idea of how people in drag represent them, but these are males who still identify as male. They're still have an attraction to females, but they do this thing where they dress in drag and they perform, right? They call themselves performers. So they express themselves during that time as female. So you can see a distinction there. Still male, but just express themselves female. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be um, specific to people in drag. It doesn't have necessarily have to do with how you dress. It could be that someone just expresses themselves more in a feminine way versus masculine. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to wear dresses, skirts, and stuff like that. Not all women wear those kinds of things. It's whatever they think is or they associate with feminism, with feminists, being feminine. Yeah. Okay, the next one is sex assigned at birth. So this is just your physical characteristics. Are you born with a penis? Are you born with a vagina? So sex, again, you can see it's very um, objective. You have a penis, you have a vagina. There are some rare cases, and this doesn't have to do with gender, but people who are intersex or people who are born as hermaphrodites, meaning they have both male and female physical characteristics. Right now, we're looking at someone who's born this way or born that way. So that's what they call the sex assigned at birth. And there's another aspect that we look at, which is who you're physically attracted to. So again, if you're one gender and you're physically attracted to someone of the same gender, or if you're one gender and you're attracted to someone of the opposite gender. So again, includes women, men, and then other genders or combinations. And so for our psychology and psychological perspective, uh, what's been established for um, laying out discussions is just what we have right here so far. So there's physical attraction, and then there is emotional attraction. This was kind of interesting to me because it kind of helped me put some things in perspective. So emotionally attracted is like the gender that you're emotionally attracted to. You have similar interests, things that you connect with that type of that gender. So there are, I'm just going to pick males as an example. Males who like to hang out with other males. They're they're heterosexual. They're physically attracted to women, but they're emotionally attracted to other males. So these are the type of people who will go hunting together or bowling, whatever it is that they do that's typically, associated with uh, males. Not that women can't go hunting and golfing or anything like that, but they tend to want to have the company of other men during social interactions, but they're physically attracted to women. So it's nice to have that category because it helps me um, distinguish that. There are also, again, let's just stick to the males. As a subject, males who are physically attracted to women, but can also be emotionally attracted to women, right? So you you may have seen an individual like this who just tends to hang out and prefer the company of women over men, but they also are attracted to women. Hmm. I'm thinking of a specific type of individual who I know, not I know, but comedians make jokes about this particular type of individual, like they're up to something. Um, but that's just me throwing things out there to make this conversation, this lecture a little more interesting. So all of this stuff will help us understand um, what's being discussed as what they call the gender unicorn. Again, gender unicorn is a term that was created by the Trans Student Educational Resources. So it's an accepted, valuable term in the psychological circle, so we can actually have some reference to discuss these issues with people who think differently or see things differently. It's a good start because it's a hot issue. All right. Now, I'm not going to break these down because we kind of already beat these to death in the last line, right? So again, gender identity, being female, male, neither or both. Um, you can be non-binary. Then we have gender expression, um, uh, cisgender and transgender. You may have heard of those terms, where your expression matches what you identify as, or your expression doesn't match where your expression doesn't match what you identify as. Takeaways. I won't read these, like I said before. These are for you to read on your own. Same thing here. All right. So let's talk about early and middle adulthood. I'm trying to see the time here. I don't want this lecture to go too long because you might just shut off the video. Early and middle adulthood, building effective lives. So let's talk about early adulthood. The range for early adulthood is late 20s to mid 30s, normally around 25. 25 is the number I hear most often. So you don't really reach full adulthood until 25. You don't fully develop until 25. It could be later for some individuals, 25 to 28 to the mid 30s. And this is a period where you're establishing professional foundations, right, as well as those personal foundations. There's some common milestones that people undergo during this time. One is their career development, so they're looking for or they're advancing in whatever career they've chosen. They're forming these long-term relationships, and this can include marriage or just situationships. I don't think a situationship is long-term, short-term, but maybe that's what they want for the rest of their life. Situationships. So establishing that lifestyle that supports that type of repeated long-term style of relationships. Just got to keep an open mind for all this. This is a time when they're also solidifying their independence. So they're looking to achieve financially, and they want more personal independence. Then we get into middle adulthood. This is from mid 30s to mid 60s. And within middle adulthood, people focus on uh, deepening their commitments that they made during early childhood. Maybe they reflect back on life often. I tend to see people who just they're melancholy and they recall things from when they were younger. They want to talk more about the past than the future, or it starts switching, right? So it's no longer looking at what you're going to accomplish. It starts shifting into reflecting backwards and less of that uh, until it finally goes to all reflecting backwards, or mostly reflecting backwards. Um, they're normally around their career peak around this time, somewhere around this time. Right? They reach the height of what they want to do, or what they feel they can do. They're raising children. They might be currently raising children, or they might be at the end of raising their children. Um, and they're facilitating, if their children has children, they're facilitating the incoming of grandchildren. The personal growth for people in middle adulthood, uh, it switches from professional growth advancements to personal growth, health, things like that. Um, so things that they prioritized before become less of a important, and then some of the things about just self-reflecting, working on your health, working on your relationships, your personal growth, all that starts becoming more rewarding, and the focus tends to switch over to that. um, let's talk about parenting styles. Okay, so parenting styles. We can see there in the block where we have responsiveness and demandingness. whether demandingness is high or low and responsiveness is high or low. So when we talk about parenting styles in general, when we, obviously for children, it's we look at uh, how caregivers will adopt one of those four main parenting styles, or how they'll lean more toward one of those parenting styles. I don't think that anyone's completely in one of those blocks. They sort of tend to be more of they sort of merge or blob into one of those areas. And we look at those two dimensions of being responsive and demanding. And oops, no, I can't believe that I just accidentally went 2 slides forward. No, I did go 2 slides forward. This thing won't let me go backwards. Oh man. All right, let's talk about menopause. So I skipped 2 slides. Menopause, right? So this is a point in a woman's life when her menstrual cycles they permanently stop. And the average age, and it does change, it does vary by country, but in the US, the average age is around 51 for menopause. The world average ranges from around 46 to 52, so it's around the same age worldwide. The US just happens to be 51, so we tend to be more at the higher end. Um, it can be influenced by genetics. So the age at which menopause occurs is can be determined by genetics, right? By looking at your mother, your grandmother, and when they experienced it. So that's going to be about the time that you experienced it as well. It's a time for biological changes again, like puberty. It's initiated or triggered by hormones. That's the word they use in psychology. So it's triggered by hormones. So, for example, within menopause, this happens because the body starts or stops or slows down the production of estrogen and progesterone. And so the body starts responding to menopause, or you can just say starts responding to the decreasing production of estrogen and progesterone. So there's physical responses. Women will claim that they have experiences hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, and there's definitely a change in sleep patterns. There's also, so other than the physical changes, there's also affective changes. So socially and culturally, reactions do vary widely depending on the individual. Um, so, for example, in some cultures, menopause is seen as this positive transition, and so that type of environment um, may produce a different reaction to menopause versus in others where it might be more of a concern, where it might be seen as of an end of stage or end of a certain thing in life. And I won't say that's a negative thing, but it might not be presented as something very positive. So again, those um, environmental factors and cultural factors can have an impact on experiencing menopause. So it's important to have a good support system from all people close around you. So not just your family, but your friends and so forth. Hopefully by this time you have a good support system for um, for going through these stages. And it's just a natural part of aging. So some women they they find ways to manage with the symptoms that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Um, and others, it could be overwhelming. Some are manageable, some are not. We just have to be understanding. This is another change. Let's talk about, ooh, slide 17. Got a long way to go. I was hoping to get through this one a little quicker. So let's talk about social changes in early and middle adulthood. So the social clock. We talk about the biological clock, but let's talk about the social clock. And this refers to the culturally preferred timeline for major life events. So like you need to be married by this particular time, you need to have kids by this particular time, and you retire at this particular time. Um, so the social clock. It has a lot of cultural influence. So different cultures have different expectations of when the right time is to reach some of these milestones. I remember talking to when I was a student. Oh my gosh, sorry. Dallas Community College. I don't know why they're calling me. All right, sorry about that interruption. What was I going to say? Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to somebody from Mexico. I was young, I was a student, and I had just came back from the military, and I felt like I was out of my social clock because I'm starting, college later, and everyone around me was younger. And then meet someone from Mexico, and th- what he told me was their expectation to be at a certain point was even more not rigorous, was even shorter than what we expect here in the U.S. So what we expected someone to be here by the age of like 20, 22, he said that where he's from, they expected kids to be like that at by the age of 18. So they were very, um, I'll say, progressive as far as reaching their milestones in life at a younger age. So that may also have included, we didn't talk about marriage, but that may have also included that where he's from, marriage was even younger and so forth. For here in the U.S., marriage, people are marrying later and later than we have in previous decades. People eventually get married, but it's just much later. As we're maybe in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it was kind of an expected. You graduate high school, you have this particular milestone, but marriage is like right around the corner. As for today, I think it's from what I'm seeing, it's pushed back at least past 30 for people to get married. If it's not further, it's at least at 30. And where before it was like if you're in your early 20s not married, you're missing some milestone. So there's this pressure from your peers, the society that you're around to be married at a certain time. I saw this documentary, and it had to do with individuals who seek marriage outside of the U.S. because in certain other parts of the world, this social clock is very intense for people to be married by a certain age, and there's a pressure that they feel in another country to be married. So if they can't get married with somebody in their country, they'll find somebody here in the U.S. who wants to get married, and a lot of it has to do with that social clock, that pressure that they should be married, and it's looked at very positively in other countries. So it's like, oh, you're finally married, and the next thing is, where's our grandkids? That kind of thing. And so they're more excited in the social clock is being met. Um, yeah, certain countries are very unique. I was watching a video uh, from Japan, and okay, again, they don't say the word social clock, but they do talk about the same concept and how people get categorized once they've passed a certain age without meeting that milestone. Let's say to get married or to have children. Um, so just some cultures are a little, I would say, harsh compared to others. Right? Divorce, right? There's marriage and there's divorce. Divorce rate in the U.S. this it's said to have been steadily declining, but you also have to look at marriage has also been declining. So if you're looking at the number of people, if rate number of people over time that are getting divorced, well, there's fewer people that are getting married, so there's going to be fewer people that get divorced. The percentage may be actually the same based on the uh, the total population of married people versus divorced people. So we are in a decline of divorce rate, but we're also in a decline of marriages. So the sample population is you can't compare it to previous populations of the sample population isn't steady, right? The total number of participants. Okay, Dallas Community College is still calling me. You know what? Let me pause and I'll call you. I'll get right back to you all this lecture. Okay, took care of that recording, took care of that phone call. Sorry about the interruption. All right, let's go ahead and talk about late adulthood, aging, retiring. So this is the final stage of life. It starts around 65. Again, these are averages. Life expectancy for a lot of people, people who live well and healthy, is going to be into their 80s and 90s. And this depends on lifestyle, so how active they are. So most older adults that continue to lead active lives, they tend to live longer. They stay physically um, fit. They're socially active, and all this actually happens to help the overall well-being. Um, it also helps with memory and perspective. So as people age, their memories of life events, they tend to become more positive, and we refer to this as the positivity effect. There was a scene in I don't know if you all have seen this movie, The Watchmen, and there's a character there who experienced something traumatic in her earlier years, like early 20s. But then she starts reflecting back on that same traumatic experience, and she looks at it with some positivity. Her daughter's there, and is like, "How could you, think that?" And she says something to the effect of, as you get older, um, the the future starts looking dimmer, but the past starts looking brighter. Even like the dingy parts of your past look better. Um, that was very interesting. Kind of relates to this, but it's in Watchmen. I can't think of the character's name though. Um, there's the superhero. Yeah. Okay, let's just keep going. But watch that. It's very interesting. Or at least watch that scene. All right, let's talk about cognitive changes during aging. So, cognitive changes during aging, and in factors that contribute to successful aging. Right? Never probably thought of as aging unsuccessfully and successfully. But as people grow older, their brains go through some changes as well, and that affects how they think, how they remember, how they learn. Ergo, that positivity effect of looking back and seeing even traumatic experiences as not so traumatic anymore. Um, again, these changes aren't exactly the same for everyone, and they don't always mean that a person can't live a healthy and active lifestyle if they don't go through these changes. So, but we do identify some factors that we list here, such as lower stress, good health habits, just trying to be a happier, less angry person, um, developing the ability to change and cope, so being able to adapt, and then physical things like exercising, and then even how we perceive aging. So if you perceive aging as very negatively, that's going to affect how successful you age versus if you perceive it positively. So there was a time where aging was seen positively, right? Someone got older, they were wiser. You tended to um, they tended to be listened to more, right? Because they had a lot of experience. And today, what I see, again, this may not be true, it's just from my limited perspective, my limited view and experience, is that we we not discard, but we move aside those who are older and wiser for some immediate uh, goal of moving forward, right? So, um, in some cases, their wisdom may be necessary, but if we see it as a hindrance to our progression, like I need to do this, I don't want to hear wisdom, I just want to do this, whether it works or not, you feel like you're being held back. I don't really know. I don't have an I just trying to come up with something that makes sense. It just sounds reasonable. All right, let's talk about what's called crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. So I just want to highlight these two ideas in this slide. And crystallized intelligence, this refers to uh, knowledge and skills that you accumulate over your lifetime, and obviously through either formal, informal education experience. And this includes everything from your vocabulary, the facts that you know, and your ability to use that information well. Right. So crystallized intelligence, it increases with age, or it's supposed to increase with age. So as we get older, we have more experiences and we learn more. And so if you're developing normally or well, that this should actually grow with you as you get older. Fluid intelligence, this is about the ability to think logically and solve problems in new situations. So it doesn't rely on previous knowledge or experience. It involves things like reasoning, abstract thinking, and it's how you adapt to new challenges. Fluid intelligence, this speaks to um, people in their at the peak of their early adulthood, right? And it starts declining with age after that time. So your brain loses its ability to solve new puzzles or understand complex ideas. Something that I am not looking forward to experiencing. I'll try to stay as sharp as possible. Neurocognitive disorder. So let's talk about neurocognitive disorder and some of the decreased functioning. So neurocognitive disorder, what's called dementia. Um, it refers to a group of conditions, and they primarily affect cognitive abilities like memory, thinking, reasoning, um, and how that interferes with daily life. So someone who's experiencing just like they function fine, they move, they walk fine, but they just forget not where they left their keys. They forget a lot of regular things, normal things. It's neurocognitive. So what it does, it impairs cognitive functioning, um, and that's very significant because um, it can be one or more of the cognitive domains. So your memory, your language, your ability to uh, keep attention to something, to hold your attention. Then again, it also starts affecting your reasoning skills, and then if you have poor reasoning, you have poor judgment skills. So these can be one or more of these in someone who's impaired cognitively. We have what's called a gradual onset progression with neurocognitive disorders, and so it meaning it develops slowly and it worsens over time. And this can vary depending on the underlying cause, but it it often includes forgetfulness, confusion, um, having difficulty with language, severe changes in mood and behavior. And there's different types and causes. So um, Alzheimer's disease is what you might be more familiar with. Um, there's also uh, vascular dementia. There's something else called Lewy body dementia. There's frontotemporal dementia. So there's all these different types of dementia, and you can have any one of these if you're diagnosed with a neurocognitive disorder. Again, and even within one of those, you can experience one to several of the symptoms that they present with. But each one is distinct, right? And the features and what causes them. So, um, for example, um, one could be related to a biological process like protein deposits in the brain, or one could be attributed to vascular issues or genetic factors. So they're very distinct to how they present or how you can diagnose them. Uh, they all have an impact on daily life. They are progressive as they get worse. They don't get better. Even though someone may feel like they've had a good day versus one of their bad days, it just means less of a bad day. Really, not really a good day. It just gets worse. So what happens is these individuals won't be able to do their normal everyday tasks. They lose the ability to hold on to relationships or maintain relationships. This is friends and family and and partners. Um, it it interferes with them being able to engage in social activities as well. So it affects their overall emotional well-being, not just the cognitive. Right? So it indirectly affects their affective domain. Um, what they need is uh, a good management and support system. Right? There's no cure for these as of yet. Early diagnosis is probably the best thing you can do to manage it before it actually starts progressing or before it starts developing. Um, there are some therapies that can slow down the progression. There's medications that can be used to slow down the progression. If it's genetic, there's a new therapy called, not therapy, there's a new treatment, not for this, but it's a treatment for like any genetic disorder. Um, of course, it's dependent upon finding the cause of the genetic factor that causes it. You might have heard of something called CRISPR, and this is where people are discussing the ethical issues of gene modification, right, for individuals, where you can actually insert a new gene that's maybe coding for being taller or having different color eyes or hair or whatever it is. And in the case of things like dementia, if it's a genetic factor and you know the gene that's responsible for it, you can actually modify the gene and insert a correct, gene that doesn't have the mutation. And again, this is continual therapy. It's not like one shot and you're okay. You continuously go through this repeated treatment. And what's supposed to happen is that your body starts copying the good gene versus the bad gene. And you eventually make more copies of the good gene versus the bad gene. And that is a way to, um, I'll say, cure these genetic disorders. But it takes a lot of work to actually find and isolate the cause of it. And once they find it, then it's another battle to figure out if they can actually swap out that gene. And this work is actually being done now um, on mice in certain conditions, and they're very successful at it. But for humans to be doing this at this stage is um, is dangerous. So let's talk a little bit more about Alzheimer's. Uh, Again, a specific type of neurocognitive disorder. This one affects the brain. It causes memory problems, thinking, behavior problems. And we could break it down simply by looking at its one of the factors that's presented, which is memory loss. It's a hallmark symptom of Alzheimer's where they have difficulty remembering things. Um, and not just old things, but things that have just happened. Um, Yeah, so sometimes in class you'll see me asking, did I say this already? Only because I've taught a class so many times and I've repeated a story so many times at a particular point in the lecture. I tend to forget whether I've said that in that class or previous class. Well, that's a little different from what people with Alzheimer's um, experience. Right? They can tell you a story and forgot they had just said it a few minutes ago and repeat the story. Um, Cognitive decline. So yeah, so that was memory loss, but there's also cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. It affects things beyond memory. So this will include problem-solving skills, problem with reasoning, and then problems with making judgments, and things that used to be easy to do. This leads to behavioral changes, right? There's always cognitive, affective, and behavioral. They're all tied together. So if you affect one, you see a change in the others. And so it's important to always be holistic and cover all three: the cognitive, the behavioral, and the affective. But people with Alzheimer's, they can experience changes in moods and behaviors, which can lead to things like more anxiety than they normally would, confusion, becoming suspicious of others because they're having problems with memory. So in their mind, they may actually have a good reason why they feel suspicious, but it's all related back to the condition of the Alzheimer's. They can become easily agitated, and because of this, right, they don't feel like they fit in, or they start feeling withdrawn, and so they'll eventually withdraw from their regular social activities. So if someone played bingo every Friday night, they might not feel like going to play bingo every night because they don't feel themselves. They know something's not right, but because they have Alzheimer's, they're really not grasping it. Again, it's a progressive disease. It just means it gets worse over time. There's causes and risk factors for developing Alzheimer's, and these aren't completely understood, but it does involve brain cell damage and formation of what's called plaques and tangles in the brain. And these can be all attributed to factors like age, your genetics, your certain lifestyle. All of these can increase the risk for you to develop Alzheimer's. Again, like I said, there's no cure, there's management. There is a possibility of a cure with the technology that's currently uh, not just in research, but in therapy as well. So CRISPR is actually being used in therapy in certain situations in experimentation. So um, if this is something that develops and becomes more advanced, we might be able to see cures for genetic disorders uh, in the near future. All right. Oh, a few more slides. Let's talk about retiring effectively. We talked about aging successfully, right? Let's talk about effective retirement. And again, this is another major life transition that affects everything. It affects your social life, your daily routines, and it has an impact on your well-being. And so this will influence your perception of happiness and what you what you mark as a standard for being happy. A lot of it's perception. So how you handle this, how you deal with it. Some people will continue to work part-time to have some semblance of what they used to do before they retire. And this is not just important financially. Some people say they do it for, financial reasons. They can't live off their retirement. I just read an article a few minutes ago before I started the lecture on older people retiring, boomers retiring, and driving Ubers to offset their low income after retirement. It could be that, but there's also the positive benefit of feeling productive, and um, that actually helps develop better social interactions uh, besides income supplementing, and it makes a person feel just better, right? So not working full time, not being completely dependent on having to have a full time job, but having some connection by working part time. So people need to, if you want to have an effective retirement, you have to plan for retirement. And it doesn't just mean investing in your 401s and investing in your retirement plans financially. Remember, we talked about cognitive, behavioral, and affective. So it's not just that financial, that physical dependence on currency, on money to survive and live. You also need to prepare effectively. So how you're going to feel about it emotionally, and things that you're going to do behaviorally. So changing. I don't drink Starbucks, but if you did, it's like, oh, maybe it's time to change some of my routines and behaviors that I can't do anymore. You prepare for that. You just don't retire and say, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore. You think about the things that you're going to be doing, things that you can't be doing, what you have more of, what you have less of. Right? Retiring, you should have more time on your hands, less money, but uh, time is a valuable asset. So you can do something with your time to benefit you financially and help you feel better overall. You'll have the time to do it. Retiring with somebody usually helps. I tell students when they first come to college, if they come to college with a friend, it doesn't even mean they're studying the same degree, but if there's somebody that they have a community with, and they're experiencing these things at the same time, the same anxieties and stuff as they're going into college, it's going to actually make them more successful in college because they have someone to lean on who understands. So same thing when you're leaving the workforce. If you're retiring, it's kind of nice to have someone who's retiring at the same time or with you. That way you're experiencing this transition with somebody, and you're not alone. That'll help you with your overall well-being. So having a good support system throughout your entire development is actually very, very important, it has its benefits. If you are married, not everyone is married when they retire. Not everyone was married even once when they were married. I think of Bill Maher, a comedian who swears off marriage, right? And to this day, he has not been. Um, but if you were, uh, You want to plan for the change in the lifestyle that you will both be um, experiencing. I think about people in the military who may have been deployed for 6 months or longer, and they have a spouse at home, and the spouse has been having to deal with everything on their own, right? They're dealing with the house problems, they're dealing with all the decision making, and you know, great that the military person is providing, financial support, and they're taking care of all these mental stresses alone, but they're handling everything. And then the military person comes home, they're in that mode of I'm in charge, and I'm just going to go, like I'm here and I'll start doing this, and that. And the spouse is like, I've been doing this alone for 6 months. Not to say anything bad about the spouse who left for service. It's just that they're comfortable making decisions on their own, and they're not going to be um, appreciative of someone coming in who doesn't understand the day-to-day routine and all of a sudden start telling everyone how to do things or get involved. So again, think about when you retire, just retire. Even at home, learn to not do anything and observe first before you decide to give any uh, advice. Um, so yeah, you really got to prepare, and some people aren't ready for that. They want to treat their home life the way they do their work life. Like, well, somebody in this case, if they were home while you were at work, they have a different life. They have to be like a different person when they're handling all the issues solely. Um, and that transition of sharing that responsibility, it's going to take cooperation, discussion, um, and so forth. What else? Retire on time, retire early from a stressful job. Yeah, some of these make sense. All right, let's keep going. Oh, that's it. Key takeaways. I won't read these. Okay, takeaway, last slide. And I want to thank you for your time. Sorry about the interruption from Dallas County Community College. And I will see you in the next lecture.